Versus bear time. So before we get to your example trades, we've got to get each of your thoughts on the AI giant. Kevin, I'll start with you. NVIDIA shares not seeing this as a positive catalyst today, but look, again, we've got pressure on chips today. The Philly stocks down and just pressure across the board. But what's your take on NVIDIA?
Taiwan Semi's performance or their earnings, their CapEx raise should reinforce the confidence in NVIDIA. The Vera Rubin chip coming out at the end of the year is going to be GPUs and CPUs. I think NVIDIA, every day we wake up, there's more and more deals being made. Jensen Huang expanding his footprint from industry to industry and company to company. I understand what's happening to the market, and I think this is going to figure out to be a pretty strong buying opportunity. When and from where, I have no idea how long this lasts, but they've got earnings coming up August 26th. It's going to be an interesting next month into that earnings report because they're going to start talking about Vera Rubin. They're going to talk about all these things and these new deals, and I think this is just a stock catching its breath, Diana, Tom.
Tom, what's your take?
Yeah, Jensen Huang on that parade around Japan, announcing those partnerships that you mentioned. I think one of the key ones was that Noetra partnership that they have where they're going to be building out and using the Vera Rubin CPU chip. Remember, they're trying to expand, and I think that's probably why we've seen a cap on shares in NVIDIA is that as everybody moves from the training models to inference, where is NVIDIA in that mix? Well, they're expanding, they're innovating to compete better on that side while they still own 90% of the GPU market at this point. I think that's key moving forward. And if you look at their stack, their full stack across the board, they continue to broaden out their CUDA reach where they can just do everything for every customer. So everybody they think is still focused on the GPU sales, which are eventually going to roll over. Now you have competition on the TPU side. You've got competition from Google Alphabet and Amazon trying to build out their own chips using Broadcom. And I think that's the concern that a lot of investors have, that they're not going to be able to keep this pace up, but they're just looking at the GPU side. I think they're losing a little bit of luster just due to the fact that they haven't really ramped up the CPU side and the push into inference like maybe some of the other big tech companies are coming for. But hey, you listen to Jensen Huang, they grew 85% last quarter on a year-over-year basis, and they expect that to continue. And he's a pretty big proponent of what they're doing and their growth rate, but the stock just hasn't reacted the way it has for some of the other companies.
All right, let's get into your example trades. Kevin, let's start out with yours. What's your approach today?
Now, Diane, if you had to guess, is Kevin bullish or bearish in NVIDIA, what would it be? I'll tell you what it is. It's leaning, my paper money trade is leaning to the bullish side. Remember, this stock traded $235 a very short time ago. Do I know where the stock's going? I do not. However, if you think that NVIDIA has a chance to rally, this diagonal spread is something in the calendar spread family that collects theta on a daily basis because you're buying further out implied volatility and selling shorter term implied volatility. So I looked at the August 7th, a 2-week spread. 2 weeks, that should show you that you do have a chance to extend duration. Buying August 7th, selling July 24th, 210, 220 call diagonal. Put that in about $6.70, trading below $6 now, Diane. So a chance to buy the 210s, sell the 220s. Do you want to maybe adjust those strikes? You can if you want to. But this call diagonal trading now below $6, Tom. It's targeting that 220 strike. And like I said, because it's a 2-week spread, you do have a chance to extend duration into that, what is it, August or July 31st spread, Tom?
Yeah, let's break this one down. Bullish example trade here. Kevin went out to the August 7th weekly options, bought the 210 call. That's about $4 out of the money to the upside. Then against it in the near term July 24th weekly options that expire in 8 days. sold the 220 strike call. So a bullish $10 wide call diagonal. You're paying roughly, we've got 670 debit on here, trading, as Kevin mentioned, just below $6 because the stock has pulled back. It's now down over 2.5% on the day. But the debit you pay is going to be your risk. So you're paying less than the width of this call diagonal. It gives you upside exposure. And you can see here from the risk profile, where do you make the most money potentially on this trade is at or near that 220 strike that you sold in this strategy. But you do need some upside on it. If you pay roughly a $6 debit for this thing, anything above maybe 213, 214 is going to be potential profitability on that. So you do need to move to the upside on a percentage basis, not that big of a move. As Kevin mentioned, you can roll or adjust that short option on the 220 call and the July 24th weekly options. You can roll that to another weekly or intra-weekly type of option series to create credits. That lowers your risk, that increases potential profitability. But this is definitely one that needs a move to the upside on this trade to get into that profitability range. And because you're paying less than half the width of, or less than the width of this call diagonal, anything above about 213, 214 is going to be profitability on this trade. So looking for some upside exposure, taking advantage of the calendar that allows you to potentially roll or adjust that and create credits and increase that potential profitability also on that one. So there's the bullish side. Kevin, I looked at something a little bit more passive on the neutral to bearish side. I went out to the July 31st weekly options, so just about 2 weeks to expiration on this one, where I'm going to sell the out of the money 215 strike call and then buy the 220 strike call. So a short $5 wide neutral to bearish call vertical. You're collecting a credit of roughly about $1.30 on that. You might collect a little bit more than that. It's trading a little bit higher. But if you collect $1.30, that's what you can make, $130 per spread with $370 in risk on it. But that's all the way above 220. You break even, 216.30 to the upside. So I've got a higher probability of success, but I've got a lot more risk than what I could potentially make on it. And those are the trade-offs that we talk about. This is passive. And one of the things I looked at in this example trade is the stock kind of topped out around 213, 214 recently. If it revisits those areas, that's still below that 216.30 break even, Kevin. But this one's a little bit more passive and better probabilities on this one, Kev.
Yeah, you remember, earnings are August 26th. You selling the July 31st call vertical, you're profitable if nothing happens, Tom. If the stock stays right where it is between now and July 31st, this spread is profitable. Mine would not be profitable. I need a move to the upside. Your spread, your short vertical spread is profitable in 3 of the 4 scenarios. And so there's the difference between owning spreads and being short spreads like Tom is here. It's just what happens if nothing happens. Tom's is profitable, mine isn't.
All right, good stuff. And yes, Kevin, I'm not surprised with you taking the bullish side.
Off with your bullish outlook. So what really is giving you confidence that earnings growth can remain strong enough to support, the relatively high valuations from equities from here?
Right. I think you're probably using the right vernacular, or the relatively high. You have a bull market. It's a raging bull market that really started in October of 22, and it's been ruthless. To the extent you get these drawdowns, they last like 6 weeks, and then you're right back. That was the situation with the tariff tantrum. That was the situation here with the drawdown earlier this year with the Iranian war. And anybody who's really looking to sit out some long bear market just gets left waiting for it because it never seems to happen. The reality is you mentioned earnings. The first digit on earnings growth for calendar 26 is going to be a 2. It's going to be in the 20s. And then next year, if the street has it right, it's going to be 14, 15% earnings growth. So if you start putting a multiple on the S&P 500, if you do this type of thing, multiple on 2027 earnings, you're looking at what, 19 times? Something like that. You could have operating earnings in this country of something like $400 at this point. And you start asking questions about, really what would get in the way of it? You got a free cash flow issue over there in Silicon Valley. That's certainly one of the things. But in terms of earnings in the next 6 or 7 quarters, there's not much really inhibiting it. I mean, we have, I think, a Federal Reserve that is not going to take away the proverbial punch bowl. The economic data looks okay. AI doom-mageddon on the labor front doesn't seem like it's panning out. So I think we're all right here.
Okay, I like that. The doom again. I mean, we continue to see labor numbers that are strong. I mean, we've discussed it all throughout, even just today's show. But I wanted to discuss this emergence of the worst cycle. And so how different is this Fed likely to be from the Powell era? And what does that really mean for that investors trying to position around rates and, of course, future economic expectations?
Well, and that's one of those things you have to try to get into the head of another human being. That's what we've been doing in this industry with the rise of the Federal Reserve in terms of its sheer might. And the theory goes that Kevin Warsh will be the new reincarnation of Alan Greenspan, who infamously would try to be ambiguous and said things to the effect of, if you understand what I said, then I didn't do my job correctly because I'm trying to really obfuscate. Now, the thing about Warsh is, I mean, I was told he's supposed to be coming in to cut interest rates because that's what Trump wanted. And the street has about a hike and a half penciled in between now and year end, really. And our fixed income team, led by a fellow named Kevin Flanagan, says, no, that's not going to happen. We think that at Wisdom Tree, there's going to be no rate hikes at all. And to the extent that you surprise dovish, let's go with a surprise dovish on that front, that would help a lot of the concepts that have been on all year. I mean, I'm sure you've had a lot of people on the show who are talking about small caps have been outperforming large caps infamously, famously all year long. That has to do with essentially the debt on your balance sheet. It tends to be more floating rate debt down in small, more fixed rate debt up in large. And to the extent that you have a Federal Reserve that does not hike and gives us a nice pleasant surprise of staying even Steven, 350 to 375, I think that's supportive of small in the second half as well.
Yeah, so globally, we now think that investors cannot look at only picks and shovels, so which means you cannot just put in only semiconductors and hardware, but also the platforms. But for China specific, I think when we look at China's self-sufficiency today, it's roughly around 40% or 45%. So which means that once you see China's self-sufficiency going to 80 or 90% by end of the decade, we think that will clearly benefit the picks and shovels. Yes, platform companies will benefit, but unlike the global AI landscape, I think what is very clear for us is that China's self-sufficiency would lead this semiconductor and also the hardware supply chain actually outgrowing at least for the next 5 years.
So how much runway does the picks and shovels or the hardware theme in China have before we start to see Standard Chartered or yourself perhaps going, okay, now's the time to look at the platforms?
Yeah, I think, as I said, if the penetration rate or self-sufficiency can go from 40 to 90%, I would say in the next 5 years, we would definitely see that happening.
So 5 years still of left of runway.
Of course, I would also be mindful of cycles and valuations, but at least on the China part, that is clear to us. Whereas the rest of Asia, which is your Taiwan, Korea, I would look at the short-term cycles, probably back in May.
So a longer-term cycle for China, you'd say?
Yeah, so longer term, I would play the long game for China, whereas Taiwan, Korea, and Japan supply chain, I would look at more the tactical indicators, including positioning. So there we like platforms more, but clearly even the so-called picks and shovels in this region are also so oversold given what we have seen in the last few days.
Get your thoughts on this, because many have said that it's going to be a China, Taiwan, Korea play, and Japan in some sense, and everyone else seems to be lagging considerably on the AI trade. Could countries like, I don't know, India perhaps do more to be more meaningful in terms of playing a part in the global AI development? Because people do highlight that if it's a question of tech talent, India with 2.4 million STEM graduates a year only trails China. You've got infrastructure, you've got the push, you've got a lot of capital also deep that might need a bit more help in organizing and mobilizing, but it's all there. Do you think India could do more really in terms of playing a more prominent role the way China has in terms of AI development? If not, what do you think is holding them back despite what seems to be all the ingredients on the table?
So going back to the self-sufficiency, when I said 40% for China in semiconductors today, I guess probably it could be even low single digit for India. So there is a lot of potential, but as we have seen, probably India is starting its semiconductor game pretty late. So we have started to see big commitments from the government, but it might take another 5 to 10 years to really close the gap. So at this stage, I would rather look at the downstream, which is your software and also services, which is where India has more exposure. But unfortunately, with the kind of disruption we are seeing with the agentic AI platforms, I would say that part of segment where software and IT services is also not something that would benefit India right away. It also will take, because that's probably late in the cycle. What I would focus on India AI plays right now is more on the power and the peripheral side of AI, where actually a lot of data center investments are happening.
In some ways, the hardware side
exactly,
as well, then, right?
Energy, power, efficiency, but not semiconductors because they're still the global players, but somewhere in the downstream, right? Like power management and also some of these components there is where India might benefit in the near term. But when it comes to upstream semiconductors and when you look at the downstream software and IT services, I think at this stage the upside is somewhat limited and the exposure is limited for India.
So in that case, is it crucial for any country or any market that wants to play a more meaningful role in AI development, the same way China is? How important is it for them to have that semiconductor hardware component there, not just for India, but for any other country that says, hey, I'd like to do more, but I seem to be hamstrung? How crucial or perhaps critical is that part of the equation?
Actually, it is the most critical because all the tokens are generated by semiconductors. So when we look at our global tech portfolio also, yes, there is near-term volatility, but you cannot ignore semiconductors. So we have roughly 35 to 40% allocation in semiconductors, acknowledging the fact that there could be volatility, but you cannot ignore. But now what we have done is we have increased our allocation in terms of platforms. So for example, our big tech allocation, which we have increased end of June, and that's actually holding up much better. It's almost 45 to 50%. So we pivot in terms of our positions quite rapidly given the market forces us. But having said that, semiconductors is not something you cannot ignore. In a portfolio context, you cannot put it zero. It is still at least 1/3 of your portfolio, and that is what we are trying to do. And in fact, in the last 1 or 2 weeks, we even started to increase allocation given some of the valuations that started to become quite attractive.
So semiconductor is still perhaps the most critical factor for AI development, notwithstanding the recent chip sell-off we've seen so far.